I worked as a radar technician at a remote monitoring station in northern Greenland for almost 8 months before I left. Officially, the place was called Outpost K-13, but nobody used the full name unless they were filing reports. Most of us just called it K, or the station. It was one of those facilities that technically existed for weather tracking and early warning surveillance, but everyone there understood we were monitoring more than civilian traffic. I'm posting this because I still can't explain what happened during my last 3 weeks there, and honestly, I don't think anyone else from the station is going to talk about it. Half the crew signed NDAs after we got rotated out, and the other half pretend none of it happened. I tried doing that too. Didn't really work. The station sat far enough from the nearest settlement that supply planes only came twice a month if the weather held. We had around 14 people total. Radar operators, maintenance techs, communication staff, 2 security guys, and the station commander. It wasn't military exactly, but most of the equipment definitely wasn't civilian grade. The work itself was repetitive. 12-hour shifts watching radar sweeps, logging aircraft, checking transponder codes, flagging anomalies. Most nights were dead quiet. Cargo planes, research flights, occasional military traffic we weren't cleared to identify. After a while, your brain starts recognizing patterns automatically. You can tell what kind of aircraft you're looking at just from movement behavior before the system finishes classifying it. That's why I noticed the first signal immediately. It happened during a night shift in late November. Around 2:17 a.m. local time, I picked up an unidentified contact entering restricted airspace northwest of the station. No transponder, no flight registration. At first, I assumed it was a glitch because the speed reading made no sense. The system briefly estimated it at over 7,000 kilometers per hour before correcting itself. I remember laughing because I thought the software bugged out. Then the signal stopped instantly. Not faded, not lost. It just vanished in a single frame like someone switched it off. I logged it anyway and called it into command. The officer on duty sounded irritated more than concerned. He asked me to rerun diagnostics and check for atmospheric interference. I did. Everything came back normal. The next night it happened again. Same area. Same impossible speed spikes. This time there were 2 contacts moving together. They appeared for 11 seconds, disappeared, then reappeared almost 90 kilometers closer to the station. That part bothered me more than the speed. Radar glitches don't reposition themselves intelligently. I saved the recording locally before forwarding it up the chain. About 20 minutes later, the station commander came into radar operations, wearing full cold weather gear like he'd walked over from another building. He asked me to step away from the console while he reviewed the playback himself. He didn't say much afterward, just told me the contacts were false returns caused by ionospheric distortion. Then he deleted the local recording from my workstation personally. I asked why he'd bother deleting interference data if it was meaningless. He looked at me for a second and said, "Because people fixate on patterns when they spend too long out here." That answer sat wrong with me immediately. After that, the signals started appearing every night, always between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., always approaching from the same direction. Sometimes one contact, sometimes 5 or 6. The speeds varied wildly. Occasionally, the system couldn't even calculate them. The tracks would jump huge distances instantaneously, then stabilize again like normal aircraft. The weirdest thing was that they never triggered any interception response. Anything unidentified entering that airspace should have started a chain reaction immediately. Communications, verification, potential scramble coordination from elsewhere. Instead, command acted like the contacts barely existed. One night I asked Eric about it during break. He was the senior communications tech and had been stationed there longer than anyone else. I expected him to brush it off, but instead he got very quiet. Then he asked me, "You seeing them visually yet?" That caught me off guard. I asked what he meant. He just stared into his coffee for a second before saying, "Don't look outside if they get close." I laughed because I thought he was screwing with me, but he didn't laugh back. A few days later, the station lost satellite uplink for almost 6 hours during a storm. We switched to backup systems and stayed operational, but everyone was tense the entire time. During outages like that, the isolation really hits you. There's no phone signal out there. No internet except station access. No real outside contact. That same night, the radar picked up a contact only 30 kilometers from the station. That had never happened before. At that range, we should have seen navigation lights or heard engines, especially in clear conditions. But the sky outside was empty. No sound. Nothing. I remember checking the exterior cameras thinking maybe the radar was locking onto ground movement or drifting ice reflections. Every camera feed looked normal except for camera 4 facing north. The image kept freezing for half seconds at a time, not glitching exactly, more like skipped frames. While I was watching, something crossed the edge of the camera view for maybe 1 frame. It wasn't detailed enough to identify. Just a dark shape moving across the snowfield faster than seemed physically possible. Then the feed cut out completely. Security went outside to inspect the camera mast about 20 minutes later. When they came back, one of them looked pale enough that I honestly thought he was sick. Neither of them would say what they found. The next morning, camera 4 had been removed entirely. No explanation. At that point, the atmosphere inside K-13 changed completely. People stopped lingering in common areas. Conversations would end when certain topics came up. I started noticing crew members checking the windows constantly without realizing they were doing it. Sleep got difficult too. The station walls were thin in some sections, and late at night I'd hear movement outside that didn't make sense. Not footsteps exactly. More like long scraping sounds moving slowly around the outer structure. The security guys blamed shifting ice. I almost convinced myself they were right until the night I heard it directly outside my quarters window. There was a pause afterward, then 3 knocks against the glass. Soft, deliberate. I froze completely. The window looked out over open snow with floodlights covering the entire perimeter. There shouldn't have been anyone there without being visible immediately. I stayed in bed for maybe 10 minutes just staring at the curtain. Then I heard the knocks again, 3 taps. I eventually forced myself to look. There was nothing outside, but the snow beneath the window was untouched too. No footprints, nothing. The final week was when things got bad enough that people openly started talking about transfer requests. 2 crew members got into an argument with the commander after another night of erased recordings. One of them accused him of already knowing what the contacts were. The commander responded by threatening disciplinary action if anyone discussed radar anomalies outside official channels. That same night, the signals stopped behaving like aircraft entirely. Multiple contacts appeared simultaneously surrounding the station in a near-perfect ring pattern. Stationary at first, then slowly moving inward. I remember everyone in radar operations going silent while we watched it happen. No one even pretended it was interference anymore. There were 14 contacts total. The closest one stopped less than 2 kilometers away, still nothing visible outside. No sound, no lights, no heat signatures, just empty darkness beyond the floodlights. Then every monitor in operations blinked off at the same time. Not a power outage. Emergency systems stayed active, but the radar displays went black for about 15 seconds. During those 15 seconds, something hit the roof above us, hard enough that dust fell from the ceiling panels. Another impact followed farther down the structure, then another. It sounded heavy but uneven, not mechanical, like something moving across the station on multiple limbs. One of the newer techs started panicking and saying someone needed to call for evacuation. The commander ordered everyone to stay seated. I'll never forget how scared he looked when he said it. The systems came back online after maybe 20 seconds. All 14 contacts were gone. No departing tracks, no fading signals, just empty airspace. The next morning, we found deep marks in the ice around the station perimeter. Long grooves carved into the snow in looping patterns. Security blocked the area off immediately, and by afternoon fresh snowfall had buried most of it anyway. 2 days later, I got reassigned unexpectedly and flown out with another crew rotation. Nobody debriefed me. Nobody asked questions. When I tried accessing archived radar logs remotely after returning home, my credentials had already been revoked. Later, I contacted Eric through a private account to ask if things had settled down at K-13. He replied once. All he sent was, "They only come during the dark season." I never heard from him again. About 4 months later, I checked the station registry out of curiosity. Outpost K no longer appeared on the network listing I originally applied through. I figured they renamed it or folded it into another program. But when I searched satellite maps for the coordinates, the entire site was gone. Not abandoned, gone. Just flat snow and ice like nothing had ever been built there at all. I used to be a sonar operator aboard a diesel-electric submarine contracted for joint naval patrols in the North Atlantic. I'm not naming the boat or the country because I still technically signed paperwork that probably covers this. But honestly, I don't think anyone would officially acknowledge the patrol happened anyway. The mission itself wasn't unusual at first. Long underwater stretches, minimal communication, routine tracking assignments. The kind of deployment where days blur together because there's no sunlight, no fresh air, and no real sense of time outside the shift rotations. Most people think submarines are tense all the time, but honestly the scary part is usually boredom. Sonar duty especially. You spend hours listening to machinery hum, distant propellers, shifting currents, random ocean noise. After enough time underwater, your brain starts searching for patterns automatically. You notice tiny differences in sound the same way people recognize familiar voices in a crowded room. That's why the knocking stood out immediately. It happened during the third week of patrol, while we were moving through a deep section of ocean over an underwater trench. We were running quiet at the time, meaning almost everything unnecessary on board had been reduced or shut down to minimize noise output. The sonar room was dead silent except for equipment and headset audio. At around 1:10, I started hearing metallic impacts through passive sonar. Very faint at first, 3 knocks spaced evenly apart, then silence. About a minute later it happened again. 3 knocks, same spacing, same tone. At first I thought it was hull expansion or loose equipment somewhere on board. Submarines constantly make noises. Pipes shift, metal flexes under pressure, valves click. But this sound wasn't internal. The directionality was wrong. It was coming from below us. Not around us, beneath us. I marked it and reported it to the officer on watch. He listened for maybe 30 seconds through the spare headset and told me to classify it as geological activity. That answer didn't really make sense because geological sounds underwater are usually irregular. Grinding, rumbling, low-frequency vibration. This sounded deliberate. Clean metallic impacts with exact spacing between them. The weirdest part was depth. The sound profile suggested it originated deeper than the ocean floor itself. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but sonar works through timing and reflection. Whatever produced the knocking was registering below the seabed return. I reran the calculations 3 times because I thought the system was bugging out. The numbers stayed the same. The knocking continued for almost an hour before stopping completely. The next morning I mentioned it casually during meal rotation, thinking maybe another operator had heard similar sounds before. Nobody really answered. One of the older sonar guys just asked me what pattern I heard. I told him 3 evenly spaced knocks. He stopped eating immediately. Then he asked, did it repeat every minute or so? That was the first moment I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. Turns out he'd heard it before during another patrol years earlier in the Norwegian Sea. Same pattern, same interval. According to him, command dismissed it back then too. That night I went through archived sonar logs looking for similar reports. Most classified patrol recordings weren't accessible from our terminal level, but older incident summaries still existed in the internal database. After enough searching, I found references to unexplained metallic impacts recorded during submarine operations going back decades. Different oceans, different vessels, same description, rhythmic metallic knocking from impossible depths. One report from the late 1960s included a transcript that made my stomach drop because the operator described the exact same 3-knock sequence before contact was lost with another submarine 2 days later. That submarine never resurfaced. Neither did the crew. I probably should have stopped digging after that, but being trapped underwater with information like that does something to your brain. Every sound starts feeling important. Every silence feels loaded. The patrol already had people on edge because communications with command were unusually limited during that deployment. We receive short encrypted bursts once every couple days, and that was it. Then the knocking came back. This time everyone in sonar heard it. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. Only now there was an echo behind it. Not a normal echo from terrain reflection. More like another set of knocks responding farther away. The officer on watch ordered active sonar suppression immediately, which confused me because we hadn't used active sonar to begin with. We were only listening passively. Still, everyone followed procedure without arguing. The captain came into sonar himself maybe 10 minutes later. I'd barely seen him outside command during the patrol, so that alone told me something was wrong. He listened through my headset for less than 15 seconds before ordering all recordings isolated from the main archive. Not erased, separated. That distinction stuck with me. A few hours later, we changed course without explanation and descended deeper into the trench area. Nobody told us why. Rumors spread almost immediately because crews onboard submarines notice even tiny navigational changes. Some thought we were tracking another vessel. Others assumed there was equipment failure. Then one of the navigation guys quietly mentioned we were following the sound source. That messed with everybody. The atmosphere onboard changed after that. Conversations got shorter. People started snapping at each other over small things. Sleep got harder too because the knocking kept returning during night cycles. Always 3 knocks, sometimes distant. Sometimes so loud through sonar, it felt like someone hitting the outer hull with a hammer. One operator refused to continue his shift after hearing it directly overhead despite sonar showing empty water around us. He swore something moved across the submarine exterior while the sound played beneath us simultaneously. The captain confined him to quarters afterward. Around the 5th night, I finally heard something different mixed into the knocks. At first I thought it was signal distortion. Static maybe. But after filtering frequencies, I realized there were voices buried underneath the impacts. Weak, broken, almost impossible to make out. I started isolating the audio manually and eventually caught a phrase clearly enough to understand. Hull breach. Then another voice. Can't surface. I thought maybe we were intercepting some old transmission bouncing through thermal layers or leftover military junk frequencies. Weird signal reflections happen underwater sometimes, but the voices kept changing. Different accents, different audio quality, different eras. One clip sounded modern. Another sounded like an old radio recording from the Cold War. One had so much static it was barely human anymore. The only constant was panic. I brought the recordings to the officer on watch, expecting him to finally admit something was seriously wrong. Instead, he looked genuinely shaken for the first time since deployment. He asked me where I found the audio. I told him it was embedded beneath the knocking frequencies. Then he asked me not to tell the rest of the crew. That answer scared me more than the sounds themselves. Later that same shift, one of the engineers came into sonar and asked why we were matching distress signatures from missing submarines. Apparently someone higher up had already compared the recordings. The voice fragments corresponded to actual naval incidents stretching back over 50 years. Some of the submarines disappeared decades apart in entirely different oceans, but the distress phrases matched our audio almost perfectly. After that, people stopped pretending the patrol was normal. You could feel the paranoia spreading on board. Nobody wanted to say certain things out loud anymore. Crew members started avoiding the lower compartments during off hours because several people claimed they heard knocking through the inner hull even when sonar was silent. Not loud knocking either, soft, patient, like someone trapped somewhere underwater trying not to waste energy. Then came the final incident. We were moving slowly along the trench edge during reduced lighting conditions when sonar suddenly lit up with multiple returns directly beneath us. Not around us, underneath. That should have been impossible because we were already near crush depth margins above the ocean floor. The contacts didn't behave like submarines either. No propulsion noise, no cavitation. Just moving shapes rising slowly from below seabed level. Every return stopped directly under our position. Then the knocking started again. Only this time it came through the actual hull. 3 knocks. The entire sonar room froze. A second later, something answered from deeper below us. 3 more knocks. I remember looking at the other operators and realizing everyone had the same expression. Nobody understood what we were hearing, but every single person on board knew it wasn't mechanical failure. The captain ordered emergency ascent procedures almost immediately after that. No explanation, no discussion, just straight ascent. As we climbed, the sonar contacts followed for several minutes before disappearing all at once. Not fading, just gone. When we finally resurfaced, the patrol ended early and we returned to port under complete communication restriction. Intelligence personnel boarded before anyone else. They took recordings, logs, even handwritten notes from sonar stations. During debriefing, they told us the sounds were caused by unusual tectonic resonance conditions. Nobody believed that, especially after one of the intelligence officers accidentally referred to the knocking as recurring. I left submarine work 6 months later. A while after that, I started digging through naval archives online and found references to distress recordings from lost submarines. Some were publicly available, most weren't. But one thing kept bothering me: the timestamps. Several voice fragments we recorded on board belonged to submarines that disappeared before our vessel was even built. I still have a copy of part of the audio saved privately. I don't listen to it often anymore. But sometimes late at night, if I play the recording at very low volume through headphones, I can hear something underneath the distress calls. Very faint, metallic knocking, still repeating in the background behind the voices. I'm not giving the exact location because I genuinely don't know if the place officially exists anymore. On paper, it had been abandoned since the early 2000s after some kind of containment incident forced evacuation of the underground sectors. The company handling cleanup went bankrupt years later, and eventually the government outsourced perimeter security to contractors. That's where I came in. The facility was enormous. Most of it sat above ground. Rusting industrial buildings, collapsed storage tanks, empty laboratories stripped clean decades ago. But the important sections were underground. 9 sectors connected through reinforced access tunnels beneath the main compound. Only the upper 2 sectors were considered safe for limited maintenance access. Everything below that had supposedly been sealed permanently after the evacuation. That was the official story anyway. When I arrived, the supervisor running orientation spent more time explaining where not to go than teaching actual procedures. Certain corridors were off limits. Certain elevators no longer existed. Certain doors were never to be opened even if alarms activated behind them. I remember joking that it sounded like the setup to a horror movie. Nobody laughed. There were only 6 of us rotating security shifts across the whole property. Most nights involved driving perimeter routes, checking fence sensors, and monitoring old surveillance systems from the administration building. Half the cameras barely worked, and the other half looked like they were held together with electrical tape and luck. The strange thing was how much power the site still consumed. For a place supposedly abandoned, the underground grid stayed fully active 24 hours a day. Backup generators cycled regularly too. When I asked why, another contractor named Petrov told me the underground ventilation systems could never be shut off completely. I asked what they were ventilating 15 years after evacuation. He just shrugged and changed the subject. The first weird incident happened during my second week. I was reviewing camera feeds around 3 a.m. when lights suddenly activated in Sector 9. That immediately got my attention because Sector 9 wasn't supposed to have power anymore. The camera itself only showed a concrete access corridor leading toward a sealed blast door. No movement, no visible people, just fluorescent lights flickering on one section at a time deep underground. I assumed it was electrical malfunction until the motion sensors activated too, one by one, like something was walking through the corridor. I called it in over radio expecting someone else to panic, but the supervisor sounded more annoyed than concerned. He told me to log it as false activation caused by legacy wiring. Then he ordered me not to send maintenance down there. That part bothered me immediately. If the systems were malfunctioning, why avoid checking them? The next night it happened again. Same corridor, same lights. Only this time the camera caught movement. A person walked past the far end of the hallway for maybe 2 seconds. White protective coveralls, full respirator mask, carrying what looked like a clipboard. I replayed the footage 6 or 7 times because I genuinely thought maybe it was another guard screwing around underground. But there was a problem. The timestamp showed the movement occurred inside a section sealed since 2011. I checked access logs afterward. No doors had opened. No elevator movement registered. According to the system, nobody had entered the underground sectors at all. That's when I started asking questions the older contractors clearly didn't want to answer. Petrov finally admitted the facility had never been fully abandoned. According to him, small maintenance crews still occasionally worked below ground under government oversight. He claimed they rotated in secretly every few months to inspect storage systems. I asked why none of us were informed about that. He said, because then you start wondering what they're maintaining. After that conversation, I started paying closer attention during overnight shifts. The underground activity became impossible to ignore. Lights turning on in sealed sectors, motion detections at impossible hours, Elevator systems activating even though the shafts to lower sectors had supposedly been filled with concrete years earlier. Sometimes entire sections of the surveillance grid would briefly come online despite being listed as permanently offline in maintenance records. The footage itself was always strange too, not dramatic. That's the part that got under my skin. Just ordinary-looking workers moving through underground corridors like the facility was operating normally. Men and women in protective gear carrying equipment cases or pushing carts, occasionally stopping to talk to each other outside rooms that officially no longer existed. No panic, no urgency, just people calmly working underground in a place everyone above ground insisted was empty. One night I decided to check the archive room myself. Most records on-site were physical because the digital systems kept failing. Buried inside old maintenance binders, I found evacuation reports from the original incident. Large sections had been removed entirely, but one detail kept appearing repeatedly. Sector 9 remains active. Not contaminated, not unstable, active. That wording stuck in my head immediately. A few nights later, I finally saw something directly instead of through cameras. I was doing a perimeter sweep near one of the sealed freight entrances around 2 a.m. when I noticed light coming from beneath the blast door. Not emergency lighting either. Bright white industrial lights moving underneath like people were working inside. I approached close enough to hear noise on the other side. Voices, metal equipment moving, distant machinery humming. It sounded like a fully operational facility beneath the ground. Then I heard someone cough directly behind the door. Not a weird monster sound or anything dramatic, just an exhausted human cough. That honestly scared me more than anything else up to that point. I radioed the supervisor immediately and told him there were definitely people below ground. There was a long silence before he responded. Then he asked me one question. Did they notice you? I remember standing there confused because that wasn't remotely the response I expected. Before I could answer, the lights beneath the door shut off instantly. Complete silence followed. No voices, no machinery, nothing. The supervisor ordered me back to administration immediately afterward. When I returned, he was already waiting in the monitoring room looking genuinely nervous. He told me never to approach Sector 9 entrances again under any circumstances. I asked him directly who was down there. He said, people who were never evacuated. That answer messed me up for days. According to the official incident timeline, everyone assigned to lower sectors either escaped during the chemical leak or died during containment failure. But after hearing activity below ground firsthand, I started wondering if some crew had been sealed inside intentionally. The security footage got worse after that. Entire groups of workers started appearing on camera regularly. Sometimes 20 or 30 people moving through underground checkpoints. Some footage showed cafeteria areas operating normally. Others showed laboratory rooms active with equipment. The timestamps were always current. One recording even showed a janitor mopping a hallway beneath Sector 9 while music played faintly through ceiling speakers, like an ordinary workday underground. I copied several clips onto a personal drive because by then I knew nobody would believe me otherwise. 3 days later, the files vanished from the drive completely. Not corrupted, deleted. Around that same time, I started noticing another detail in the footage. None of the workers ever looked directly at the cameras. At first that sounds meaningless, but think about it. People naturally glance toward visible security cameras constantly without realizing it, especially in industrial facilities. These people never did, not once. Then came the incident that finally made me quit. I was alone in the monitoring room during night rotation when every underground camera activated simultaneously. All 9 sectors, corridors, laboratories, storage rooms, dormitories, places that were supposed to be abandoned 15 years earlier were fully lit and operational. Hundreds of people moved through the facility, workers talking, security personnel walking patrol routes, scientists reviewing monitors. It looked like the evacuation had never happened. Then every person on every camera stopped moving at exactly the same time. Not gradually, instantly. The entire underground facility froze. Every single person turned toward the nearest camera simultaneously. Even people who shouldn't have known where the cameras were positioned. I remember sitting there unable to move while dozens of camera feeds showed motionless workers staring directly outward. Then one of them smiled. Not exaggerated or creepy. Just a tired-looking middle-aged man in a lab coat smiling faintly into the camera like he recognized someone. A second later, every feed cut to black. The lights inside the monitoring room flickered off briefly. Then I heard elevator alarms activating somewhere below the building. One by one. Sector 4, Sector 5, Sector 6, descending upward toward the surface. I grabbed my things and left before the elevators reached ground level. I didn't even finish the shift. About a month later, I tried contacting Petrov to ask what was really inside Sector 9. His number had been disconnected. Another contractor I knew claimed the facility had been permanently demolished shortly after I left. But last year, I found something online that brought everything back. A satellite image uploaded to a mapping forum. The facility was still there. And in the middle of the compound, one section of snow had melted completely above the underground sectors, like something beneath the ground was still generating heat.